want to introduce to you Mr. Elmer Gillick, well-known Elgin personality, man about town, famous entertainer, architect, and social critic. So take it away, Elmer.
Wow. I hope I don't have to live up to that in 15 minutes. I have brought just a few examples of the more than 3,000 photographs that I have accumulated related to the history of the city of Elgin. My mother bore 11 children, 7 of whom survived to adulthood, and of them, my sister Mary was the only girl. So we were a little one-sided on the side of boys. Being part of a large family and not a wealthy one, I always had to work. I washed dishes and mopped floors at the YMCA throughout high school. And I want to tell you what I learned. If you're going to do something, see it through all the way to the end and do it well. I've always tried to do that. It's simple. And I believe it works. During the time that I was working in high school at the YMCA and then later as a surveyor with the Interstate Commerce Commission during the summers, and then after that, when I graduated from high school with the Red Path Chautauqua as a erector of tents and a crewman, I always tried to apply that. A Chautauqua was a very common form of family entertainment in the late 19th century and the early 20th century in the entire United States. Chautauquas were organized so that entertainers and cultural speakers, lecturers, orators could come to small towns in America and present wonderful entertainment and knowledge to families that had no other way of getting this kind of thing. I was impressed. I thought, this is the way to do things. And I think I was inspired by some of them to the point, and also by my brother Olaf, to become a magician and a ventriloquist. My brother Olaf, who was older than I, was an accomplished magician. I admired his skills. I worked hard to become as good as Olaf was as a magician. And there was a time when I was living here in Elgin, I was 15 years old, that Olaf offered to teach me a magic trick. The problem is that Olaf was grown up. He was my bigger brother. And he lived in Dixon, Illinois. I didn't have any means of transportation except my bicycle. So I got on my bicycle and I went down the Lincoln Highway to Dixon, Illinois, learned the trick from Olaf, and drove back on my bicycle. That's a round trip distance of 150 miles. And then I came back and I practiced 2-3 hours a day. That's how seriously I took my magic. Well, magic was not just a hobby for me, it actually became an income. I developed a character called Dr. the Amazing, Dr. Clutterhouse. After I developed my skills as a ventriloquist, I needed a medium for my ventriloquism. And how many of those of you, especially the younger ones, know what a ventriloquist is? Young man over here, Mr. Property of Packers, do you know what a ventriloquist is? Well, I'll tell you what a ventriloquist is. A ventriloquist is a person who can talk without moving his lips and make it sound like it's coming from somebody else. And sometimes, as a medium, he uses a puppet. So he puts a puppet on his hand, and then he talks, and it looks like the puppet is talking. Well, I needed a puppet. And so I developed and designed a puppet, and I called him Tiny Tingle Toes. Is that a great name? Tiny Tingle Toes, like everything I wanted to do, I wanted to do it right. And so I found a wonderful Chicago sculptor who created a wooden head for Tiny Tingle Toes. Made it very lifelike, painted it, and we had a cute elf hat on Tiny Tingle Toes. And for his eyes, I went to a fella that makes glass eyes, the kind that people who lose their eyes use to replace them. So Tiny Tingle Toes was very, very realistic looking, and I had a lot of fun with Tiny Tingle Toes over the years. He's become my friend and has been my friend for life. Well, you know, magic was not just a hobby for me, it was also the means of providing an income. And so I would do magic shows, The Amazing Dr. Clutterhouse, Tiny Tingle Toes. But you know, the reality of it is that when you have a family, the kind of income you can get from doing magic and ventriloquism is not always enough. My lovely wife, Ruth, and I were fortunate to have 3 children, Jane and the twins, Bonnie and Bill. And we needed a steady income to raise them. And so, based on my experience as a surveyor, I got a job with an architectural firm in Chicago. And there I was a draftsman, but was inspired to become an architect. So I studied at the Armour Institute at night. I traveled back and forth from Elgin by train to Chicago and back every day for 16 years, working in architecture in my offices downtown Chicago. That became a little too much to do, and so in 1945 I relocated my offices to downtown Elgin. At first, when I was an architect, my study was, my focus was commercial, industrial, and institutional buildings. I designed the Larson and Ellis Middle Schools. I designed the Huff Elementary School here in Elgin, as well as other institutions. I also designed some wonderful homes, custom designed homes. 200 River Bluff, 402 River Bluff, 126 Cooper. And I gravitated, however, from the industrial commercial into residential homes. It seemed to be better to me. Well, after World War II, that was 1945, and all the people started coming home, the soldiers, getting married, having families of their own. And what did they need? They needed a house. They needed a plan to build a house. And they couldn't afford to pay an architect a custom fee for building a custom home, and many of them needed to have a home. So that gave rise to a very good business called stock plans. Does anybody know in the world of architecture what a stock plan is? Well, let me tell you about that. It just happened to be what just fell on the ground. This is a stock plan. You see, it's a plan that my firm would create with a standard design of a house. Not just one standard. We had many. We had houses designed for people with hobbies. We had houses designed for people with large families, people without families, people with big incomes, people with small incomes, people with gardens, people without gardens. You name the specialty, we had a stock plan that they could buy right out of a catalog. And so, over the years, I've had the wonderful opportunity to not only take many, many, many photographs on my own, but also I very fortunately acquired the collections of John Manley Adams and his son, who were wonderful, well-known Elgin photographers for many years, and Art Eck. Art Eck was the official photographer for the wonderful Elgin road races. And I got all of those in my collection. There's something about a photograph that's different than what you read in a newspaper. Now, if I show you this photograph, which I will, I'll come a little closer so you can see it. Can anybody tell me what kind of a vehicle is in that photograph? Yes, it's a horse and buggy. How many wheels does it have? 4. And if you're looking at this house, which is on the north side of the street, and you're looking north, Which direction is the horse facing? West, correct. And how many people are sitting on the porch? Well, if you look closely, you can count those. What are they sitting on? What does it look like? How many chimneys does the house have? What's on top? All of these facts you can see in a photograph. And the photograph is only going to tell you that. It will never tell you anything other than what is on the photograph. And the photograph always tells the truth, because every one of the photographs in my collection has this stamp that I designed with the name of the original photographer, John Manley Adams, when it was taken, as close as we know with some of the older ones, and what its location is, and if there's any other additional information that's helpful to the people who are looking at this photograph, there it is as well. There is truth. There is honesty. Something you don't always find in the written or the spoken word. As a reminder to myself and anybody else who comes into my office, I always keep this sign hanging on the wall. People forget. A photograph never forgets and always tells the truth. I hope that you don't forget that. Thank you very much.
Well, welcome to Bluff City Cemetery, and there's many notable Elginites in this area, including myself. I'm Mrs. Violet Fairman. You may know me from Albert Fairman, Mayor of Elgin. Does anybody know him? He's quite popular, really. No? All right, have you ever heard of the Hagelow twins? No? My goodness. Well, I'm one of those Hagelow twins. Personally, I think I'm the more pretty one, but we were identical. Couldn't tell us apart, really. Actually, someone told us once that the only way you could tell us apart is that one of us smiled all the time, and the other one, me, never did. I think they got us confused. My sister Rose and I were identical in even our weddings. We got married on an October, beautiful day like this, and we got married at our house in a double ceremony. We had identical wedding gowns, identical hair. We even went on the honeymoon together. The funniest part is that we both ended up marrying Alberts. Coincidence? I think not. She married Albert Heidemann, a fine clerk, and I married Albert Fairman. We were so identical that we would call each other every morning, even after we were married, and plan out our outfit for the entire day. We'd have the same jewelry, we'd have the same dress, the same hair, everything. That's why people had such a hard time differentiating us between each other. Luckily, our husbands didn't mind that we were always so close to each other. They got along very well, luckily. You know how men can be. We used to go out to parties, all four of us together. We would go out into town, or we'd bring them home and we'd play cards, and we'd sing, we would dance. Oh, those were the days indeed. We'd even go on vacation together, apart from our honeymoon, of course. My Albert started out as a grocer in his father's store. Excuse me. And he eventually quickly grew out of that, finding that it was too small for him to be a grocer anymore. So with the help of his brother, Emil, the two of them opened up a toy and stationery store. My husband was also a great artist. He used pencil and charcoal, watercolors, beautiful, beautiful pictures. He has pictures of castles in Germany, landscapes, and even Elgin itself. We actually have a picture of our house that we used to live in. Albert Fairman, my beloved husband, he was definitely in the public eye for quite some time. He was an alderman for 13 years and mayor for 10. In 1909, he came into office as mayor. And during that time, he set about a couple of bans on Sundays. Now, some people in the entertainment business weren't too keen on not having anything on Sundays when you should be in church. Anyway, my husband set these bans in order to encourage people to go to church. So no roller skating, no movies, no theater, and no other public amusements. You were supposed to be in church. Elgin has quite a few to pick from, honestly. Some people didn't care much for that, and words were exchanged between them. My husband was a very good man. He had a big heart and good intentions for Elgin. My husband and I never had any children. But luckily, my sister had a daughter, Violet Rose. We took her in almost as our own daughter as well. She had 2 sets of parents, 2 Alberts and 2 Flowers. We loved her like she was our own. We also spoiled her like she was our own as well. Needless to say, I think we did a very good job of being aunt and uncle. I was also part of the Masonic Temple, as well as my husband, and I became a worthy matron of the Eastern Star. My father was actually the one who started the whole thing in our family of being part of the Masons. He's actually buried in his entire Mason outfit. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I must bore you with my story of matching clothing and earrings. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
How authentic is your outfit?
Fairly authentic. It's pretty good, yeah.
Does it actually belong to?
No. No, they wouldn't let me do that. It's a rented costume.
It's a rented costume.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you.
Guten Tag, wie geht's, wie geht's? Ich bin Vater Hermann Friedrich Freutenich. Sprechen Sie Deutsch, ja? Nein. Nein? You do not speak German? Goodness gracious, please forgive me. I thought you were the all-German speaking congregation sent here to meet with me today. I do apologize. Thank you for the warning. Might we begin anew? This time, strictly in English, yeah? Good afternoon and welcome once again. My name is Hermann Friedrich Freutenich. I understand that some of you have traveled a great distance to be here today. None as far as I, perhaps. And that you have traveled that distance to learn a few things about me. Why? Only you and God know for certain. For you see, I should never be the main focal point of anyone's Sunday, but rather the focus be on He who I so faithfully served for the entirety of my adult activities. Assuming that each and every one of you have already attended a worship service this morning, and that you have given praise to our Holy Father who is deserving of such, I will enter into a once-in-a-lifetime agreement with you to offer you an overview of my life. With that agreement firmly in place, let us begin. I was born on the 5th or the 6th day of November in 1835 in a small village by the name of Allerdorf in Hanover, Germany. My parents were Frederick and Sophia. At a very, very young age, my parents and I emigrated to the United States, where we settled in an area known as Fort Wayne, Indiana. Soon thereafter, my father and I became U.S. citizens. It is mentioned that early on, I showed strong mental equipment, and that after my confirmation in the year of 1850, my bent of mind was favorable to my pastor's suggestion to study theology. My parents therefore arranged the necessary means whereby I entered the Fort Wayne Seminary of the Lutheran Synod in the year of 1853. I studied there for 2 years and then moved to St. Louis, where I pursued my education with great avidity. And on the 15th day of February in the year of 1860, I graduated with a cum laude. Less than 6 weeks thereafter, I received my first calling to the ministry as assistant pastor at St. Paul's Church in Chicago, Illinois. My early work consisted mainly along missionary lines, gathering many different groups together that later expanded into independent congregations in and around the metropolitan Chicagoland area. I continued similar work at churches in Elk Grove Village, Ottawa, and Oswego, Illinois, as well as several communities in the state of Michigan. Returning to my beloved Illinois, I continued my pastorate at a small church in Ottawa, which was soon placed in flourishing condition. On the 28th day of November, in the year of 1875, I was installed as the sole pastor of St. John's Church here in Elgin, Illinois. Afterwards, by the way, I held that title for some 33 years. Afterwards, due to health concerns and advancement of years, I accepted the position of assistant pastor at St. John's Church, a position which I held until my passing. It is a matter of written record that during my tenure at St. John's, I christened several thousand children, confirmed many hundred more, presided over several hundred funerals, as well as presiding over hundreds of marriages. Speaking of which, I was married in Chicago on the 8th day of January in the year of 1865 to Johanna Heinz, who traveled faithfully with me throughout life's pathway. She was a constant help, consolant, and joy. We made our residence on the corner of Kimball Street and Center Streets here in town, where we raised our considerably large family, 6 boys and 3 girls, some of whom remain with us this very day. It was once written that I was energetic and faithful to my country and to my beliefs, and that such faith only strengthened until the evening of my life, which quietly came to me on the 15th day of February in the year of 1918. I had remarkable memory, great mental acumen, and was considered by most a deep student. At the time of my ultimate calling, I was filled with life's experiences and vicissitudes. I believe that this concludes my agreement with you here today. However, if you will, I would like to continue with my agreement with our Heavenly Father. I once asked congregation members during a Bible study at St. John's, what was the one Bible verse that represents all others? What one verse or passage does the entirety of Christianity rest upon? If you were going to evangelize out into the world and spread the word of God, but could only use one verse, what might that verse be? I see that some of you are thinking as I speak. Some of you are sleeping. My, how times have not changed a thing. One parishioner said, "Pastor, I am certain that it is the Beatitudes where Christ tells us how to treat one another." Yet another parishioner said, "Surely it must be the Ten Commandments." Another parishioner said, "You know, I believe it might be the Lord's Prayer." And yet another parishioner said, "I believe it comes from 1 Corinthians 13, where it touts that love is above all other things." After, I believe, close to a 2-hour spirited debate, the question was posed back to me, "Father, what is the answer? Is there an answer? Is there one verse that the Bible rests upon all other verses?" The answer was clear to me. I hope that it is clear to you. If you do not know this verse, I hope that you will embrace this moment to learn it. It comes from the book of John, the 3rd chapter, the 16th verse. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son to die for us, that whoever shall believeth in him shall not perish, but have life everlasting." Life everlasting. What a concept to be had here at Bluff City Cemetery. Have any of you ever had the notion, as you're passing by this beautiful cemetery or any other, to say to yourself, of all of those people that are resident there, I wonder how many have life everlasting? If you cannot remember those words, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son to die for us, that whomever shall believeth in him shall not perish but have life everlasting," if that, for whatever reason, is too many words for you to recall, then recall these 3 words. John 3:16. And if for some reason those 3 words do not immediately come to your recall, then remember this one word: believe. Whoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Believe in the Lord thy God with all your heart. Believe. Believe. And now on this sacred day, on these sacred grounds, may the Lord guide you. May the Lord make his face shine down upon you and give you his special, special peace. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I say unto you, go now and serve the Lord thy God. Amen. Dankeschön.
My name is Elizabeth Dufresne. I'm better known back home in Indiana as Bessie Cunningham. That's where I grew up. Also, my brother and my sisters have many children, so I'm also known as Aunt Bess. They had many children. I waited till much later in life. I was 35 before I fell in love here in West Dundee with my husband Henry. We moved to Elgin and we lived off of Grove Street. We were married in 1903, and a year later I gave birth to Mildred. That's really where my story begins and ends, because just after Mildred's first birthday celebration, I noticed I wasn't feeling well anymore. I felt faint. I had a hard time breathing. And one morning, Henry and I were having our coffee downstairs and our toast, and I announced to Henry, I'm going to go for a walk. I need to get a breath of fresh air because this feeling is coming back again. And so I left the house, and along the way I waved hello to our neighbors. But I didn't get very far, because as I was walking, I started feeling so sick and I couldn't breathe. My chest was caving in. So I cut my trip, I came right back to the house. I just made it in the door. My husband carried me and put me in the bed and summoned the doctor. 2 of them arrived, but it was too late. My body was shaking uncontrollably with convulsions. My eyes were rolling backward in my head. My tongue was so swollen no air would go down. There was only one part of my body that was still functioning, and I used it to clench Dr. Burlingham's wrist. And I clenched it so tightly until it was over. I never saw my 13-month-old little girl again. The doctors who witnessed my death were in shock. When I was 37 years old, just went for a walk outside my house, waved to my neighbors, and they witnessed that death. Why? Both doctors refused to sign my death certificate. They summoned the chief of police, Mr. Younger, to come back from Elgin to my home. They brought the coroner up from Geneva. I died at 11 o'clock. By 1 o'clock, they had begun an inquest to the mysterious death of Elizabeth Dufree. That evening, my body was laid out at a local funeral parlor, and there were many visitors. 2 of those visitors were the doctors that witnessed my death earlier in that day. There were 2 other doctors there, and the 4 of them spoke together, recounting what had happened. And the 4 of them went forward and said to the coroner and to the chief of police, "You need to probe deep, because there's something mysterious about this." The next morning, a jury was put together. They were brought back to the funeral parlor where they were allowed to witness my body one more time, and then taken over to my home so they could see where I died. And as they were leaving, one of the jurors noticed there was something on my living room parlor, my parlor floor. She asked my husband's sister, "What is that?" And she said, "Oh, that's ashes. Henry smokes a cigar." Was it ashes? There were many witnesses that were brought forward, including the 2 neighbors that I said hello to that day, including my sister-in-law, Henry's sister. She was right. Henry did like to smoke. I met him in Dundee, and he was a fascinating man. I did not marry him for his good looks, I must tell you. I married him for his intelligence and his wit. He was a medicine and science man. Born in New York, he studied out there, and he was part of a terrible accident when he was putting his concoctions together one day at school. There was an explosion that went right in his face. He lost one eye, and the other eye suffered and had a twitch. His vision at best was blurry. He was not an attractive man. He was teased by the children in town. And I felt bad for Henry, not only for that, but because his first wife had died, and his second wife too. His first wife, Sarah, in New York, gave birth to a child just after they were married, and had a beautiful little girl. The following year, in giving birth, again, she passed away. So the aunt was left to raise that little girl, and Henry moved to Dundee. He began practicing masonry there. He actually patented a new technique in building bricks, and he was able to sell that and became quite successful. And he married a very young girl. They had 3 children right in a row, boom, boom, boom. The second wife's name was Bertha. Bertha died an awful, terrible death suddenly at a young age because of an asthmatic experience in her chest. Terrible story. About a week later, results came back from the lab in Chicago where they had taken portions of my stomach in a jar with a messenger on the train. It took a week for those results, and when they came back, it was disappointing. There was really no evidence of arsenics or any kind of poison found. So the results were not good for the jury to make their determination, except that an amazing discovery was made right here in the cemetery on the same day. The superintendent of this cemetery told a newspaper reporter from the Chicago Tribune that I, in fact, was not the 3rd wife of Mr. Henry Dufree, but the 4th. The first wife was buried in New York. The second wife, Bessie, with 3 little girls, was buried over there. In 1902, there was another Mrs. Dufree buried over there in 1900, and I was buried here in 1905. Now wait a minute, if he married Sarah in 1878 and had a little girl and she died with the second one, how did she die in 1879? That's not possible. And if he married Bessie and had 3 little girls all in a row and buried her in 1902, how did he have 3 little girls and bury his other wife in 1900? That's not possible. Was he married to 2 women at the same time? Mary Dufree had a couple of different names. One of them was Marie, another one was Nettie. Nettie was very well known in Dundee. In fact, when he first arrived in Dundee, he announced that Nettie was his wife. But then when he ran off and eloped with the 14-year-old Bessie, he came back and said, no, Nettie is my housekeeper. And the 3 of them lived together for a short time. Interesting. Well, I died on the 20th of June, and on July 1st, it was all over. The final results came back stating that I had pneumonia. I had Bright's disease, which causes an inflammation in the liver, as well as degenerative substances in the heart. Natural causes. Curious. My little girl was raised by my brother and his wife back in Indiana. And I need to tell you one more thing. My husband remarried to Annabella, and they moved to Indiana. I wonder whatever happened to Annabella. I want to thank you for allowing me today to talk a little bit about this interesting story, and I hope that you'll take some of today's technology and find some of the missing answers there. And I have one last thing that I'd like to say to the ladies in the group. Ladies, do not let the men in the kitchen. And if you must leave in the middle of a meal, take the cup with you. Thanks, have a great day. Oh my goodness. When I am painting, I am just in a world of my own. So, does that make me self-absorbed, focused, willful, persistent? I don't know. But I know you had to be all of those things to be able to be a woman who lived during the time that I lived and follow a career in art. Well, good afternoon. I'm Anna Lynch, and I was born in 1865, the last year of the Great American Civil War. My parents had come to Elgin from Ireland in the 1840s, when Elgin was just a small community, a few hundred people. But I lived in Elgin when it was really discovering what it could become. The Elgin Watch Factory was here, and it was producing timepieces that were known worldwide for their beauty and their precision. And I don't know if you know it, but the prices of butter were set right here in Elgin during that time, thanks to Gail Borden and his technology and his businesses here. Well, I wanted to ask myself what I could be, much like Elgin was doing. Oh, I know that there was an answer to what should women become. You could become a wife and mother, or failing that, you could become a spinster, perhaps with a proper job that was acceptable, and living with a kind relative, maybe in a back room. But I wanted to know what my possibilities, what my destiny would be. And this was a question that delighted me, but also frightened me. I started to find the answer to this question when I first picked up that paintbrush at St. Mary's Academy. Oh, the freedom of different media, different subjects, different treatments of things. I knew then that this is the area I wanted to pursue, but don't think that my first efforts were very good. I saw them and I knew that I would have to work very hard to develop whatever talent I might have. I also knew I'd have to be very strong because women in the arts were not very common and we were looked askance at and somewhat suspiciously. Well, I started my studies in 1893 at the Chicago Arts Institute. What a time to be in Chicago. The Columbian Exposition was going on, all kinds of building all throughout the city. It was a dynamic time. And as I continued to search of where I would want to go with my work, I decided I wanted to concentrate on miniatures. Now this is an example of a miniature. It's not one of mine. Mine were a little bit bigger, and I did some of mine on ivory as well as canvas. But you can get the sense that it was a portrait done in a very small format. I remember when I took one of my miniatures one day to a jeweler to be framed, because that's how we did things in those days, and he was so enthusiastic about it. He said that mine was better, in his opinion, than my teacher's. Well, for every kind word I received, there was also a harsher, nasty word for me. One of my teachers who taught us during the day after school was talking to one of his men friends and said, "I don't know what those girls are doing in class. They should go home and get married." Well, I didn't go home. I went to Paris. Oh, the classes in Paris. Oh, how wonderful. You were exalted if your teacher said that you were doing well, and just cast down if he said your best wasn't good enough. I was able to actually teach some courses in Paris, which was a great honor, again, with my miniatures. And of course, took countless walks through that great repository of art of the ages, the Louvre. I worked with some of the best-known artists of the day, Monsieur Bergerot, and I was chosen, wonder of wonders, to exhibit in the Salon de Paris. Well, when I came home, the local newspaper wanted to interview me and wondered, how did you deal in Paris so far away from home? And they quoted me as saying, "Oh, after all, the world is small. Everywhere you go, you meet someone who has lived at or near Elgin or has heard of the city's fame." At this time in Chicago, they were building a very special type of building, studios that were built as studios just for artists. They were right up there between Ohio and Ontario Street, right by State Street. I don't know if you know the area. Oh, a very special place to be. They were called the Tree Studios, and they are still being used today. Now they're considered Chicago landmark, and they're still being used for studios. Oh, my studio, what a wild profusion of art all over the walls. Some of mine, some of my friends. The smell of the oil paints and other artist media in the air. The bright rugs and the odd mismatched furniture. Oh, I just loved that. I was in my element, and I was in my beloved Chicago too. But what was also special about that time was perhaps this was the time in my life where I was most accepted in a community. We were not men or women, old or young. We were just artists trying to develop our craft. I went back to the Chicago Art Institute, but this time not as a student, but as an exhibitor. And I found a program from that time. It has a reproduction, if you'd like to take this, it has a reproduction of one of my miniatures. And a critic from the Chicago Tribune, no less, said she arouses from canvas to canvas active admiration, quick respect for her control of her medium, wonder at the insight that has given her the key to this beauty, and eager interest in every detail of her work. This was a wonderful critique, and from there I went on to exhibit all over the United States, in fact the world. I went to Washington, D.C., New York, Boston, Philadelphia. I went to the St. Louis World Fair, and I won the bronze medal at the San Francisco Exposition. While you know that those were all of miniatures, and that was my main method, I also did some still lifes and landscapes that did get some acclaim. I was able to procure, just for this afternoon, one of my still lifes that hang in the Elgin Historic Museum. It's one of my early works. Well, one of the exhibits that really meant a lot to me was one that was right here in Elgin at the Laura Davison Sears Gallery, which is in the Elgin Academy today. I had a picture of the old Wing Park swimming pool. But I worked very, very hard on the people in that picture. And the critics said, once again, it would seem we almost know some very definite personalities caught in the portraits of the men and women and some adorable children. The reason this meant so much to me was, as I was developing my style, I rejected the blurry, out of focus impressionists that were very, very prevalent as I was developing. And yet I couldn't go to the harsh colors and somewhat ugly, in my opinion, subjects of the realists. I wanted to paint what was there, but not just reproduce it. I wanted to capture each person's unique personality and specialness and be able to put it on canvas. And when I got this critique, I realized, well, at least sometimes I was able to do that. I always returned to my home, 54 South Crystal, at 54 South Crystal throughout my whole life. It was the only place that I lived, and it was there that I passed on in 1946, at the end of another American war. But 50 years later, they were still talking about me in Elgin. A historian, E.C. Alft, if you know him, he was doing an article on me, and he said women artists in Anna Lynch's day were considered to be wandering out of their proper pasture. He was right. I wandered out of my proper pasture. I took the pasture less traveled, and it's usually a rocky one. But it was one that brought me a wonderful life, and it certainly for me made all the difference. Self-absorbed, willful, stubborn, persistent? I don't know. You'll have to judge. Thank you. Please come up and see the painting.
Good afternoon. My name is George DeForest Sherman, and I was Major of the 36th Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment. And I was so proud of my service during the Civil War as a Major that I put it on my tombstone, Major, 36th Illinois. My parents, Henry and Jeanette Sherman, came west from upstate New York in 1838, about 3 years after the little town of Elgin was founded. They had a claim of 300 acres on the west side, which the Kimball boys, Sam and William, tried to jump. After a while, my father, Henry Sherman, came into the city and was a druggist and a store proprietor. And then in 1864, he had the foresight to buy 5 shares of stock at $1,000 a share in a new company formed in Chicago called the National Watch Company. And this firm said if the city of Elgin raised $25,000 in stock and supplied 35 acres of land, they would put up their watch factory in Elgin. And my father put up $5,000, a huge sum, and bought 5 shares, and he is known as one of the 4 immortals, the 4 men who put up the $25,000. In company lore, they talk about the 4 immortals and the 7 stars. The 7 stars were the craftsmen who came west from Waltham, Massachusetts to make machines for the company. And in 1858, I had a very gratifying experience. I went by train to Freeport, Illinois, to listen to a debate between Abraham Lincoln and Senator Stephen A. Douglas. And that was a crucial debate of all those held here in Illinois. Because at that debate, Abraham Lincoln asked Senator Douglas a key question. Senator, do the people of a state have the right to exclude slavery from a territory prior to becoming a state? And that put the senator on the horns of a dilemma. If he said yes, which is what the crowd wanted him to say, that was fine. But he would have antagonized all the Southerners who said that slavery could be anywhere. So he answered yes, but it cost him the votes of the South when he ran for president in 1860. And that question was always known as the Freeport question. that Lincoln asked Douglas. When the war broke out in 1861, I enlisted in the 36th Illinois as sergeant of Company A. I'd like to explain a little about these Civil War regiments. There were more than 2,000 of them in the Union Army before the conflict was all over. They consisted of 10 companies of about 100 men each, plus the headquarters officers. A total of about 1,025, sometimes less, sometimes a little more. A total of 1,376 boys were in the 36th Illinois. Because of our casualty rate, we had to get recruits as replacements. I'm very proud to have been a member of that regiment. Of the 2,000 regiments the Union Army raised, only 40 had the casualties that the 36th had. We had 1,376 members, and our killed and wounded were 769. Can you imagine? We started out at Pea Ridge, drove the Confederates out of Kentucky, and had a bloody engagement at Stones River, and then were sent east to defend the railhead at Chattanooga. We were lined up along a creek called Chickamauga Creek, and we would have won that battle, but by mistaken orders, a whole segment of our line was pulled out, and the Confederates poured through, and if it hadn't been for the Rock of Chickamauga, General Thomas, our whole army would have been surrounded. We retreated into Chattanooga, where we were under siege for 3 months. In the end of November, General Grant said, "It's time we break out." And he ordered our line, including the 36th, to take the rifle pits at the base of some steep hills called Mission Ridge, which the Confederates had heavily fortified. The orders were to take the rifle pits and wait there until the Union artillery came up. Well, away we went. "Chickamauga, Chickamauga," we would say. And of course, boys wanted to let the Confederates know we were out for revenge. We took those rifle pits, and then a strange thing happened. The Confederates above us had fortifications in a second line and a third line, and they were shooting down at us, and we had no real cover, and we didn't want to retreat. And then a strange thing happened. Without orders, first it was a squad, then a regiment here and a regiment there, and pretty soon the whole blue line began running up that hill. "Forward, boys," I said. And we captured Mission Ridge, drove the Confederates into Georgia, and General Grant, who was watching from binoculars, said, "I didn't order that. Who gave the order to go up ahead?" And then after he saw what happened, he decided to forgive us. Well, we were really bloodied up at a lot of battles. We lost 65 alone in Stones River. And after the war, we came home and formed the Grand Army of the Republic. It was equivalent to the American Legion or the VFW today. The Grand Army of the Republic was a unique organization. You couldn't be born into it. A college degree wouldn't grant you membership. Wealth wouldn't buy you a membership. The only thing you had to have was an honorable discharge certificate from the Union Army. That's all you had to have, and that meant everybody could be a member who had that honorable discharge, including people who fought with the United States colored troops. And so for many years, we were the only organization in Elgin, club or church or anything else, that had both black and white members. We were all comrades together. And we had work to do. In the 60s and 70s in Elgin, you could walk down the streets and see men, many of them impoverished, with one arm or one leg, men hobbling along on crutches because there were no veterans hospitals in those days. And the Grand Army of the Republic looked after their widows and their children, and eventually pushed to have pensions given to them. and I am pleased and proud to say that when Congress authorized those pensions, they were restricted to Union Army veterans and not to those damn rebels. They didn't get 1 cent. I don't have any sympathy for those people. They were gallant fighters. But I'll tell you what, it's commonly read in the history books that somehow the Emancipation Proclamation was unpopular, that the North was all in favor of saving the Union, but a war to free the slaves was nothing that they had contemplated. Now that might have been true of the folks at home, but after Abe Lincoln issued that Emancipation Proclamation, the men in blue were all in favor of it. And why? Because when our regiments moved down into Kentucky and Tennessee and Georgia and saw how those Southerners had enslaved men, women, and children, we were opposed to slavery. And when they say, even today, that their soldiers fought for states' rights, that is a lie, because they fought for the right of a state to make chattels of human beings. That's what their states' rights said. Well, after the war and my membership as a commander in the Grand Army of the Republic, I went west and was an agent at an Indian reservation in Colorado. And then for a time, I worked at the watch factory and was a purchasing agent. By purchasing agent, I meant in those days when men and women at the watch factory were working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, they couldn't take off and go to Chicago to buy something that wasn't available in Elgin. So many of us said, give us your order and the money, and we'll go into Chicago and buy it for you and then deliver it. The railroads didn't like it, but made a good living for us, and I didn't really have to worry about making a living anyway, because my father, Henry Sherman, was not only one of the pioneers, but in 1864, he had the foresight to buy 5 shares at $1,000 apiece in a newly formed company called the National Watch Company in Chicago. And that company said if the men in Elgin raised $25,000 in buying the stock and gave them 35 acres of land, they would establish a watch factory in Elgin. So Henry Sherman became one of the 4 immortals who raised the 25,000. And the 7 stars came out of Waltham, Massachusetts, and started the factory. And at the time he died, my father, Henry Sherman, was a very wealthy man, and I inherited 1,056 shares of a very profitable company. All over the United States, people were buying Elgin watches, making Henry Sherman and others who had the foresight very wealthy. Well, it's been a warm day, and I wish you the best. And if any of you are young enough to say that you would like to marry a woman, make sure you mean it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is James A. Palmer. I was born on February 1st, 1836, same year my dear wife Sarah was born. I died on Memorial Day, May 30, 1915. If I had lived to November 1st of 1915, my beloved Sarah and I would have celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary. And what a wonderful dinner that would have been. Sarah and I had but one child, George. George was born on July 1st, 1876, and he died 53 days later. He's with us now. Still, I had a long and good life. I was a member of the Masons Lodge. The Mason symbol appears on my gravestone marker. Boys from the lodge did the burial service here. Of course, there's a funeral service at the First Congregational Church. I was a member there for 44 years, on the board of deacons for 20 years. I was in the choir. I was a member of the choir for 37 years, something considered quite remarkable for my time. That means on something like 1,426 mornings, I looked up from my hymnal at my beloved Sarah in her pew, and she smiled back at me. I came to Elgin after the war. Lived in Geneva for a time, came to Elgin 1874, went to work for an undertaker and furniture maker. Same fella. See, in my day, the two went hand in glove. Because if you could make a cabinet or a table, you could make a coffin, see? And I worked for him for several years, and because of my own enterprise and the help and frugality of my wife Sarah, I was able to buy the business. And with a partner, I became an undertaker. My partner handled the furniture end of it. Before our business, all that undertakers would do for a bereaved family was take the specifications and size for the coffin, make the coffin, and deliver it by wagon, hopefully quickly, to the home of the bereaved. Everything else was up to them. That's not the way I did business. I handled the graveside interment. I became an embalmer. I mastered this craft and for many years was the only embalmer in the city of Elgin. I recruited the pallbearers. I arranged for the flowers. I did everything. I took as many burdens as I could off of the family of the deceased. In the many and varied callings of life, there is perhaps none that requires as much gentleness and goodness and sympathy and good taste as that of the undertaker. I had a very long life. And I ask myself, why? Why did I live so long? I should have died that Sunday in April of 1862 in Tennessee. Oh, you folks don't know. When the Great War of the Rebellion started, Sarah and I were living in Iowa. And like all the men of our town, I promptly joined the Army. I signed on to the 14th Volunteer Infantry Regiment, Iowa. Colonel Shaw commanding, and I want to assure you, no finer regiment ever marched out of the state of Iowa. We joined the Army under General Grant, moved up the Cumberland on transports, and promptly took the Confederate post at Fort Henry. The transports and gunboats moved down the river and up the Tennessee. We marched overland and captured, after a fight, the Confederate force at Fort Donelson, along with the army of almost 15,000 men defending it. We took them lock, stock, and barrel. They surrendered to General Grant. Then Grant's army moved south down the Tennessee to a place called Pittsburgh Landing. We were to be reinforced by an army under General Buell. The two armies together would then move south and make an end of the foul rebellion. My regiment was camped a little less than a mile from a tiny log cabin church called Shiloh. You've probably heard the foul slander that we were surprised in our tents that morning. Nothing could be further from the truth. There had been heavy firing out on the picket line all day Saturday. General Prentice doubled our picket line. And then before dawn that Sunday morning, he sent a whole regiment into those woods to see what was about. They got into a big fight. That musketry woke us up. And at 5:15 in the morning, our drummer beat to arms, and we formed battle line in front of that tent. When those Rebs, and there were 44,000 of them, charged out of those woods, they were greeted, I give you my word, with a proper volley of Yankee musketry. But we couldn't hold our camp. Regiments to the right and left of our division gave way. Most of the boys never been in a fight before. Our boys were considered veterans after Donelson. The colonels were county sheriffs or judges or lawyers who'd been elected by their men. No training. Our division was led by a proper officer, W.H.L. Wallace. He'd fought for a year in the war against Mexico, and he knew just about exactly what he was doing. I have to keep saying W.H.L. Wallace because there was another Wallace commanding a division in the Union Army at Shiloh. Lew Wallace. You folks probably heard of him because he wrote a pretty good book after the Civil War. The book's called Ben-Hur. I don't know if you read it. Lew Wallace had no training at all, couldn't read a map. 6 o'clock in the morning. He's 12 miles from the battlefield. General Grant tells him to take his men and move to the battlefield. General Wallace gets lost. He's leading 8,000 men in a long, straggly column. At one point, he sees men marching in front of him as he's at the head of his column. He sends someone to find out who those men are. Well, it's the rear of his division, which he was accidentally marching in a large circle. General Lew Wallace didn't make it to the battlefield till nightfall. General W.H.L. Wallace had us fall back to what in history came to be called the Sunken Road. Our division and that of General Prentice fell back maybe 8,000 men at the start. Now, it wasn't much of a sunken road. It was just a dirt road that had been worn down maybe 2 feet, maybe up to our knees, but it was a place for us to rally and hold. And hold we did. Charge after charge after charge that day. We held them. We held them. Well, General Grant was forming the army and forming a line that was going to hold to the rear. General W.H.L. Wallace, God rest his soul, he did not live to see the sunset. He went down that day. But we kept fighting. We kept fighting all day. Now the Rebs, they made this noise when they charged. I can't describe the noise to you, much less do it. It was a screeching, high-pitched, I would call it an animal noise. Thousands of them making this noise as they charged us. It was supposed to scare us. Now you folks are all good people. You can keep a secret. I, Sergeant Palmer, will tell you it scared hell out of me. But then every time we give more than they could take and they'd fall back from that sunken road, we give them a proper Yankee yell. Of course, proper organized yell. We'd yell, "Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!" But then they'd come again. About 3:30, they brought up artillery, 60 guns, hub to hub, firing into our position. By the way, the Rebs came to call our position the Hornet's Nest because we gave them what for. But shell hit every 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. 6, 8 boys go down each time. Now, I was 25 years old. That's why I was a sergeant. I was the oldest man in my company. The boys did me the dignity of calling me Old Uncle. youngest boy in our company named Willie, 17, he goes down with a musket ball through his stomach. Right next to me, I hear him crying for his mother. Then I hear him say, "Sergeant, help me, Sarge, help me, help me." I should have kept to firing, but I didn't. I put down my musket. I picked Willie up in my arms. And I held him that way till he died. Maybe only a minute or two. Well, by 4 o'clock, there's only a little over 2,000 left of the 8,000. We're surrounded now. Some of the boys don't have any rounds left. I had 2. And Colonel Shaw comes and he says, "Boys, you did your duty. Put down your muskets, boys. You did your duty. We're surrendering. It's over." I threw down my musket with the others. By this time, General Grant, he had a good strong line to the rear. No rebel army on earth was driving General Grant off a battlefield. I'll tell you that right now. Something I always remember. In our part of the line was a peach orchard. And the peaches were in blossom. And the Reb guns and shells, they shot hell out of those peach trees. And during the battle, peach blossoms, or parts of them, snowed on the boys. And just as this Rebs are about to lead us off, I look down, there's Willie, his eyes open, looking at the clear blue sky. His face covered with peach petals. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. You know, what happened to the remains of all those boys after the battle, it couldn't be helped. More Americans died in that one battle than in all the battles in the Civil War before that battle, and in every battle, in every war in American history up to that battle. They couldn't give them proper burial. The remains of someone shouldn't fall that way. I'll tell you, I was awful proud to be an undertaker. I was also proud too because I joined Post 49, Grand Army of the Republic, our veterans organization, and I was commander for several terms. I was at the dedication of the monument to the boys that fell in the War of the Rebellion, in front of the new courthouse in Geneva. Chose 3 of us, just like we were, done by a fine sculpture too. I was there with my post. Every year I helped organize the Memorial Day Parade and would always be in the front of that parade. The day I died was the Memorial Day Parade. And as the boys marched past my house at 326 Chicago Street, all the old gentlemen of Post 49 fell into step, and every man in the parade took his hat off as he passed my house. They tell me that in your time, our monument in front of the courthouse is covered with the green patina of corrosion and the ugly black scar of soot. If it's true, do you remember us? Do you know what we did? Do you know about those boys' lives cut short, covered with peach blossoms? Do you know that we passed on our dear old flag with every star on it that was on it when that war started, and some new ones besides? Do you know about us? Well, in case you don't, I came here to tell you my little part of it. Now, if you don't mind, it's a nice Sunday afternoon, and I kind of like to spend it with Sarah. Thank you.